far. Hopefully you learned a lot in the process and you now are somewhat comfortable with using database, either using SQL queries or using ORM, and you also feel comfortable with using Django, a framework. So reflect back on all the things that you've learned over the last 5-6 weeks, and you will realize that there were a lot of things that you've learned. Now you understand how to pass information from one page to the other using post. You understand how to use session, database, and how to use a framework, do all the front end. And I know at this point you're probably anxious about getting your belt. And that is one of the most important things you should focus on at this point. But while you're studying for your belt exam, I wanted to plant the seed in your mind about projects. Now, it's super, super, super important for all the students to have strong projects by the time that they graduate. My rule of thumb is I encourage all students to come up with at least 3 strong projects. And when I say strong projects, I'm not talking about a project that looks like one of your assignment, like the wall assignment or Ninja Goal. That's not a project, that's an assignment. A project needs to be, in my mind, at least 3 to 5 different pages. It needs to have a lot of the backend features demonstrating that I know how to put together ERD, database, I know how to do front end, I know how to do a lot of the back end, the CRUD operations, and so forth. It's also very, very important for you to learn how to use Ajax and incorporate some parts of Ajax into your project. Any assignment that doesn't have any Ajax is really you're building a Web 1.0 type of application, and no one's really using Web 1.0. Everyone is all moving on to Web 2.0, which is basically using Ajax. So make sure that if you haven't had time, after your belt exam, go and study Ajax, get familiar, and incorporate Ajax to your project. Now, to make your projects a little bit easier, we've created some wireframes for you that you can follow. So I have at least 3 underneath the video, and I'll create a separate video explaining some of the projects that we have outlined and what makes some of these projects a good project. But just make sure that you go and watch that video as well as some of the guidelines that I put below so that you can walk out with 3 strong projects by the time that you graduate. Now, projects always take longer, and students usually get overambitious, and there are a lot of things to do. So a few tips that I outline, but please make sure that you build a clickable prototype before you start building the backend. Don't go into Django right away and start building your project. Go ahead and build out your project in first just plain old HTML, CSS, JavaScript. You can create a folder, create a bunch of HTML, and then create a static folder, put CSS folder, image folder, JavaScript folder, and just make it all just static, just plain old HTML. Make it clickable so that I can click and go from one page to the next with some fake data. And if you do that, and then add backend later, it will go much, much smoother. So even if you're not able to build all the backend functionalities, you should at least walk out with a clickable prototype that either at the end of your belt exam or if you haven't finished your project, just as soon as you graduate, you can just move in and finish the rest of the functionalities. There are some other tips that I provided below the video, so make sure that you watch that. But the most important thing in my mind is that you set the expectation for yourself that, okay, I'm going to walk out with 3 strong projects by the time that I graduate, and that you build your clickable prototype. And of course, if you skip the belt and then go into project, it's going to be much, much harder. And plus, you need the belt anyway to graduate. So go ahead and study for the belt. Do the best thing, to put your best efforts to get your belt. After you get your belt, jump immediately to your project. Now, if you don't want to work on some of the 3 projects that we have, then you have 24 hours to come up with a project and get your instructor to approve. If you are not able to come up with an idea, just work one of the 3 projects there. Because oftentimes, you're going to be given a project. Someone's going to come to you and say, this is what I want you to build. Go ahead and build it out. And in a lot of cases, they may even have a clickable prototype, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because they worked with the design firm. They did all of that, and they may give it to you and say, I want you to build exactly this. So it's not a bad practice just to take our wireframe, use responsive web design on first few pages, use Bootstrap, use Foundation. Do not make your project look like balsamic wireframe. It needs to look professional. Spend time making your clickable prototype look professional. A good clickable prototype is when you built it and you click, and it almost feels the rest of the world that it almost feels like you actually built all the functionalities when you actually haven't built any of the backend. But that's how good and detailed your clickable prototype needs to be. And if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a product manager, project manager, it's always a good process to follow this, where I come up with an idea, wireframe, design, come up with a clickable prototype, and then give it to your engineers to have them build. If you build a bunch of specs and then send it to them, then most likely your product is going to take 3 to 5 times longer, maybe a lot more than that. So this process is just really important, whether you are a developer or product manager, entrepreneur, or whatever. Okay, so yeah, go ahead and watch the next video.